Dr. Goodwin, if you're happy for us to begin, I can start the meeting now. Good morning, everyone. As agreed at the Assembly's annual meeting on the 14th of May 2021, the Confirmation Hearings Committee is allowed to appoint a chair on a meeting-by-meeting basis for the 21-22 Assembly year. For the first item of business, I will conduct an election for the chair for this meeting in accordance with the GLA's standing orders. In the event of one candidate being nominated, I will declare the nominated candidate chair of the Confirmation Hearings Committee for this meeting. A proposer and seconder is required for each nomination. In the event of two candidates being nominated, I will ask for votes in favour of each candidate. Are there any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Assembly Member Peter Fortune, please.
Thank you. And does anyone wish to second that nomination?
I'd be happy to second.
Thank you. Then I declare that Assembly Member Fortune is elected Chairman of the Confirmation Hearings Committee for today's meeting.
Members, thank you very much. This is the first time I've had the honour and the privilege to chair a committee at the London Assembly, so be gentle with me. We'll move straight to agenda item 2, which is apologies for absence and chair's announcements. I'd like to start by welcoming everybody to this meeting, which is a Confirmation Hearings Committee. Our main item of business today is to hold a confirmation hearing for the office of Chair of Re London. But first, we have a few short items of formal business to go through. First, can you make sure that any electronic devices are switched off or to silent or don't buzz? Any that do erupt will be fed to Lauren. And if I could now ask that Lauren give us any apologies that have been received for today's meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Cooper, for whom Assembly Member McCartney is substituting, and Assembly Member Hall, for whom Assembly Member Devonish is substituting. We've also received apologies from Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you. That moves us to agenda item 3, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 3 and ask Assembly members if they have any other disclosable pecuniary interests to declare? I see none. Can I also invite Dr. Liz Goodwin, OBE, to declare any interest relevant to the business of this meeting or in relation to the proposed appointment?
No, none to declare.
Thank you very much. Moving to agenda item 4, which is the minutes. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 1st of June 2021 to be signed by me as correct for the record?
Agreed.
That's agreed. Thank you. Which moves us to the next agenda item, which is the confirmation hearing in respect of the appointment to the office of Chair of Re London. Again, can we welcome Dr. Liz Goodwin to the meeting? The committee will be putting questions to you in relation to your proposed reappointment to the office of Chair of Re London. However, can I first ask members to note the background information circulated within the agenda for the meeting?
Noted.
And note the supplementary information which was received after publication of the agenda, which is Dr. Goodwin's CV and supporting statement, and a summary of the role and key issues and priorities for Re London.
Noted.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the question and answer session. So thanks again, Dr. Goodwin. I'll be leading off with a nice big open question for you. What have you personally brought to the role of Chair of Re London over the past 4 years?
So I think when I joined Re London, which was then called LWARP, there were a number of things that struck me. First of all, that it tended to work a bit in silos. You had some work with local authorities and local authority support, and then you had work with businesses, and we've been trying to bring that together over the years. I think that the name LWARP is very confusing. You spent the first 5 minutes basically of any meeting explaining what LWARP meant, and I think Re London is a much clearer name. But I think personally, I'm very passionate about the environment. I'm very passionate about the circular economy, and I think I've help the team to engender that and to transmit that and to maintain their focus. I'm a very focused person, fairly analytical, but I believe I've brought that focus and that analysis to the organisation. We've been very clear about what we're focusing on. The agenda is very broad, and so it's very important that you do focus, and I've tried to bring that. And then I think finally, throughout the whole COVID situation, that was a huge shock to any organisation, and I think I've supported the organisation through that so that they are then better equipped to help London, the boroughs and businesses in London to manage the issues that COVID presented last year in particular.
Thank you very much. Just picking up on that point about COVID, recycling was really impacted due to that lockdown, and some boroughs had to stop recycling collections completely. In your role as chair of Re-London, how will you work with local authorities and private contractors if another lockdown were to occur? And how will you ensure that recycling is still seen as a priority for the capital?
I think that communication and sharing information is really, really important. So any future crises that occurred, I think it's very important that you try to pull the right people together and to talk about the problems. So there's a lot of transparency, a lot of sharing of information, and a lot of sharing of the solutions. So you come up with the best overall solutions. I mean, it's a tragedy when you find that recycling can't work as well as it should. But I mean, any of those problems, they tend to be fairly short-lived, provided you have basically you try to get to your long-term plan, but you also try to manage the short-term crisis in between. In terms of the importance of recycling, I think it's absolutely fundamental. I mean, there are an awful, most boroughs have declared climate emergencies. Recycling is a really important part of tackling the climate emergency, partly because it's something that every single person can do. And so it's a way in to doing their bit for the environment and trying to improve things. It's not the biggest thing that people can do, but it is a practical thing that every single person in the capital can do.
Thank you very much. I strongly agree with you that it is something that people can really, they feel like they're contributing to the recycling agenda and to the climate agenda by doing that. And so I guess one of the roles that you have is to make it easier for people to recycle. So in that sense, can you tell me what work you've done about helping people who live in flats to recycle? I know you've done some work on it, but can you tell us about that scheme, how successful it's been, and is it something you'd like to expand?
Oh, it was a fascinating project. I went and visited, and it was when it was underway. It was a very interesting project. We ran with the Peabody Trust to try to understand the issues that are faced in the flats. And there are some really basic things, like people have, flats kitchens that are so small they don't even have room for a recycling bin. So how do we expect them to recycle when everything goes into one bin? And then when they're expected to take all the recycling out again. That's not practical. So finding solutions that work for people in the way they live. What's the location of the recycling facilities in respect to people's sort of travel in and out of the flat? So, if the recycling is all around the back in a dirty, horrible, dingy part, then people aren't going to be encouraged to go there on a dark winter's night when they're on their way home or on their way out. So there was a whole load of different things that we looked at. We tried a number of different approaches in different flat environments. We saw improvements in recycling. We saw massive reductions in contamination levels in particular. We saw higher participation rates. Flats will always be quite difficult to recycle in. I mean, we got some extra funding subsequent to the project, which we're now using to further extend the work. But I really hope we'll be able to do more and to build on that, because once you start a project like that, I don't think you can just go in and do something for 6 months and then walk away and everything will be sorted out. It's got to be a continuous process, partly because you get turnover in residents, but also standards slip. So I think there was a lot of lessons that came from that flats recycling. it's been picked up by other cities around the UK, but also cities in Europe who are very interested by the fact we've done something on recycling flats. When I've talked to some of the leaders in some other cities around Europe, they don't even bother to try to get flats to recycle. You know, they might have some bring sites, but that's all they expect flats to do. So I think it's a tribute that we tried to do some flats recycling, and I do think it's one of our standout projects from the last few years.
Thanks very much, and I strongly concur that making it convenient is going to be really important. Assemblymember McCartney.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Goodwin. My question is a broad one, and that's, what do you think has been your main challenges over the last 5 years as chair of Re-London, and how have you overcome them?
I think there have been a number of challenges. I mean, clearly COVID is one that would just feature all the time. So that was clearly one that in the last couple of years. But before that, I guess when I first joined, I had a reasonable understanding of the structure of London and the way London worked. But actually working more closely with London councils is quite complicated because you need to find the right routes in and to find the right people to engage with. And I still think that we have relationships on different levels with the boroughs. So, you know, the team in Re-London who work directly with boroughs have their very good relationships with people on the ground. That doesn't actually then translate back to others in the borough or the politicians knowing anything about it. So you can then go and have a conversation with a borough where you know a lot is happening on the ground and there isn't that sort of connection. So I think that is a challenge, and it will always be a challenge, and we're trying to find ways of improving that, maybe having a better newsletter or something that goes out to a broader group of people to try to improve the visibility of Re-London more generally with the boroughs rather than just at the practitioner level. So I think that's certainly been a challenge. I think I mentioned COVID. That was a challenge, you know, everyone suddenly having to work from home, and you know, how do you keep projects going which are basically going to be based on face-to-face interactions, and finding alternative ways of doing that. And then I think finally I have a long-term concern about the long-term viability and sustainability of Re-London, and how we make sure that it is financially secure for the future. And we've been thinking about that over the last 4 years, and we will continue to work on that. I refer to it in my supporting statement that has to be one of our priorities to broaden our funding base. So yes, we must work on some commercialisation. Yes, we must work on some private sector support through membership fees and through commercial work. But also we need to get more public funding support as well. And I'm hoping that the things like the extended producer responsibility might help in that respect.
Thank you. And can I also ask you, what would you point to as being one of your biggest successes as chair?
I think that the flats recycling is fantastic. I think that there are some other projects that we've done. The business transformation program, that is, if you're going to make London a circular city, you need big businesses to do stuff, but you also need a lot of entrepreneurs and small businesses to do stuff. And the fact that we've run the business transformation program and we've worked with over 200 SMEs, all of them in the space of either trying to make better use of resources or thinking about circular models. That's a huge number. And yes, okay, a lot of them won't become the leaders of the future, but some of them will become the leaders of the future. And that will help drive the engine room of the city. And we need London to be one of the engine rooms of the world in terms of its profile as a circular city. I think when I first came to the confirmation hearing 4 years ago, I said that my vision was for London to be the most circular city, and it still is.
Thank you. And my final question is around your roles with the World Resources Institute and the United Nations. and how do they help you in this role? And given that you have other roles, do you have the time capacity for this job?
Yes, they do help me, and actually my role in London helps with them as well. So that there are some benefits both ways. I mean, I work for the World Resources Institute for a day and a half a week, so it's not a massive commitment. The stuff I'm doing for the United Nations at the moment, if I'm totally honest, it takes more than my allocated time, but I think it's making a difference. Both those roles are they're essentially the same, but I'm trying to make sure that the world reduces food waste by 50% by 2030. And we're working towards the Food Systems Summit in September. And as part of that, we're trying to build a coalition of member states, but also of cities who are going to be driving food loss and waste reductions over the coming years. Now, food waste is very important in London. And so that feeds straight into that, the London programme on food, to address food waste, both the trifocal programme in the past, but also the new Food Wave initiative. So there is some crossovers there, but also the links into the C40, because I'm talking to the C40 about being part of the coalition for the UN, and obviously London is part of the C40. London is one of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation flagship cities, and so that links again into the food system. So I see all of these supporting and helping each other. They're certainly not conflicting. And I have plenty of time to do London because I care about London. I'm a Brit, and I'm very proud of the fact that London holds the position it does hold, and that the UK holds the position it does hold. Whenever I'm talking to anybody in any other country, I'm always citing London examples and UK examples because we are leading in so many areas. We don't talk enough about it, and we don't demonstrate our leadership properly globally, but we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Devenish.
Good morning, Dr. Goodwin. My first question is, what have you done as chair, please, to raise the profile of Ray London?
So we've run a number of successful campaigns. We did the rebranding 18 months ago, and that went down very well. We put a lot of effort in behind that. We tested the name. I think that's been well received. Re London is better. Has been well received as a brand. It's easier to understand, as I mentioned earlier. So I think we've done a good job of rebranding, and that stands us in good stead. In terms of broader raising the profile, I've spoken on a number of platforms. I work hard to try to work closely with the Mayor's team in the PLA and also with London councils. I try to work hard with businesses. I try to make sure that I'm representing Re London whenever the opportunity arises, both in the UK and overseas.
Thank you. My next question is, how often have you met with the Mayor himself, Mr. Khan, and to what extent have you delivered on the priorities of his Mayor's environment strategy? What's worked well, and what has been the main sticking points, please?
So I've met the Mayor only once, but I meet Shirley so often that I probably couldn't count the number of times I've met Shirley, because we work very closely together, and I value that relationship, and I know that she talks frequently to the Mayor, and so I feel as though my talking to Shirley is as good as talking to the Mayor. In terms of delivering his priorities, clearly the responding to the climate emergency and achieving the net zero of 2030 are really fundamental to me, and I think that all our work around circular economy and improving recycling are there. There's obviously the achievement of the 65% recycling rate, which is challenging, but it's a municipal recycling rate, and we can't rely on household waste to get to that 65%. I think we can rely on households to make improvements on where they are at the moment, and the RRPs at the moment are predicting some growth in household recycling, but we also need to do far more with business recycling rates, and we've got a piece of work at the moment to try to actually understand the data better around business recycling, because there really isn't enough good quality data to even know what the rates are at present. I think there are the other challenges in that the Mayor's agenda, including the sort of responses to the changes in legislation coming out from DEFRA. Having worked in the environmental sector for well over 20 years, the new legislation coming out is so fundamental. The consistency in recycling will be fantastically positive. We've been wanting it for years. Extended producer responsibility, again, massive potential. And I think helping boroughs to understand those and to build them into their plans and strategies is really important. So our business plan is well aligned to the Mayor's strategies. And I think that we have a good relationship. We understand the priorities, and we understand the way they shift as well, and how changes happen, but we also understand the context. So yeah, I think that helps.
Thank you. But do you ever see London not being the worst region in the country for recycling? And if not, how will you use your role to improve it, please?
I think there are going to be boroughs in London where recycling rates can be competitive with other places in England. I think there are always going to be some parts of London where it's quite difficult because of the demographics and the nature of the housing. Quite what the level will be that those areas get to is still to be decided, I think. Even DEFRA now recognises that it is going to be difficult for London to get to very high recycling rates, because a lot of London is not leafy suburbs where you can have garden waste recycling and people have lots of space in which to collect materials. So then, I'm sure that there will be boroughs in London where recycling rates continue to be among the worst performers in the UK. But there are a number of boroughs in London where there is no reason why they shouldn't be among the best.
Thank you. My final question is just a technicality. On your supporting statement, you say your proposed reappointment until November 24. Most appointments until the election of the Mayor, which is in May 2024. So why did you say November?
That might be a mistake. It would be until the Mayor's appointment. I don't know why that says that. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Devenish. We move now to Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to reverse the order of the two questions I've got, just to alert you to the fact I haven't forgotten one. So, yeah, nice to meet you. I think it'd be really interesting to have a longer chat between myself and you at some point. Sorry, just bidding for a meeting in the middle of the meeting there. But, yeah, I wanted to start by just getting the numbers down on the statutory targets that we're aiming for in London. How far away are we from achieving the 65% municipal waste recycling target that we have? And how far away are we from sending zero recyclable waste to landfill and exporting no waste from London at all? Those are the three statutory targets I believe we are trying to reach.
Yeah, so on the recycling, the household level is around 33% at the moment. The trouble, as I said earlier, we don't have good information, good data on business recycling rates. And we're doing some work at the moment this year to try to get better figures for that, because we know that households will not get to 65%. RRPs are predicting they'll get to about 40%, and we therefore need overperformance by the businesses. But until we have that data around the businesses, it's quite difficult to know when we're going to get there. It's a challenging target, I won't deny that. But I think you have to have a target and you have to aspire to get to it. And I'm very hopeful that we will manage to get to it. There's a complicating factor, which is that if we are successful in reducing waste, then achieving a 65% becomes even more difficult. And personally, tend to think that reducing waste is even more important than recycling targets. So there's always a bit of a balance there, but I'm not shirking away from the 65% because that is our target and we will do all we can to get there. But we've got to try to reduce waste as well. On the, I do have the figure for, we've done better than most of, so London's leading in terms of England, in terms of reducing the amount going to landfill. So the amount sent to landfill was 7% in 2018-19, it's now 2.8% in 2019-20. And compared to England, which was 10.5 and 8.5. So we're well below the rest of England in terms of the amount going to landfill. So we are confident that we will manage to hit the target of no biodegradable recyclable waste going to landfill by 2026.
And in terms of exporting waste, how far away are we from achieving zero on that?
I don't have the figures to hand. I'd have to go and check those. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Maybe we have another meeting and then we can discuss it. I mean, exporting waste per se, we shouldn't be doing. Exporting recyclables is more tricky.
Yes, I'm sorry, including recyclables, yeah. So I'm really pleased there that you touched on the fact that reduction is more important than recycling, because it really bothers me that we have this target for recycling that's as a percentage of the waste that we produce, and then we have this target not to send anything to landfill. And I think without a target to reduce the amount we produce in the first place, we're more or less creating a target to incinerate within London. So I wanted to ask, first of all, are incineration rates in London going up? Do you have any figures for the amount of waste we're burning within our city and the extent to which that's increasing due to not having a reduction target? And you mentioned new legislation. Is it part of your role, and are you doing this potentially in your international role, to lobby for a statutory target to reduce the amount of waste produced in the first place, and therefore the money to follow that would help us to achieve that target? I think that's a big gap at the moment, and you probably agree with me.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's not part of my role, but it is something that I talk about quite a lot, because you're right. You know, I mean, Arup did a piece of work for Re London a few years ago, which looked at predictions of the amount of waste that we might see, the amount of reductions we might see if we actually were successful in making London more circular. And they are dramatic, and they certainly imply that you need less disposal capacity and less incineration. I don't have the numbers on the amounts being incinerated, but there will be some reduction going on, but there will be some increase in incineration as a result of decrease in landfill. So I don't quite know where those figures sit at the present, but I personally think we should be focusing on waste reduction targets. Recycling targets were really important when we first started recycling, because frankly we were rubbish at recycling, and so there was a long way to go. I think as we get better at recycling and as we get better understanding of the importance of waste reduction, the more we should focus on reduction targets. And the recycling targets are then, they sit alongside, but they shouldn't be the overall driver, because otherwise you get disincentives, as you say, you get incentives to do the wrong thing.
And from a financial sustainability point of view at Re London, is there a kind of perverse incentive to encourage incineration within that issue that you have as well? Because that is something that potentially generates energy that can be sold. Is there an issue there for you? And is the need for some sort of government grant to help you achieve reuse, repair, all of those other things before you get to incineration something that you're lobbying for, or you're asking governments to create?
I hadn't thought about that as being a perverse incentive. I don't think so. I've got my eye on the extended producer responsibility legislation, because that is going to generate funds. Now, I'm sure that the Treasury won't want to ring fence it to go back into the environment, but I think London ought to get some of that funding that comes out of the extended producer responsibility, and that ought to be going back into reuse and repair and all the circular things. I don't think there are any perverse incentives that focus us on incineration.
Okay, thank you very much. And so just moving on to the practical things that you've done then, can you outline for us the programmes you have for encouraging a more circular economy and how much funding you've been able to put into those so far? I think from your outline that you've given to us, we're talking about wands of millions of pounds, but if there's any more that you can tell us about, then please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that Re-London it's not just about distributing money. I think it's about sort of building the capacity and giving advice and influencing and supporting. So some of the important things on Re-London, the Business Transformation Programme has given out some grants, but it's done a lot of support and helping businesses think through and through, working with them, doing bits of research, giving them advice on different polymer types, sort of really practical things that help those businesses to mature and develop. So I think that's a really important part. There are some things like the business accelerator, which we ran with the Carbon Trust. That was really, really important because they working as a partner with the Carbon Trust meant that we pooled our skills and we actually managed to help a number of businesses to grow as a result of that. There's obviously the Circular Economy Business Investment Funds, which have benefited a number of businesses, and some of them directly in the circular economy. And we've got Circular Economy Week, which is really important, and it grows every year, and it always seems to engage an awful lot of people. In terms of the things coming up, I think that the Academy is a really interesting idea. Initially we focused on boroughs and helping them to become more circular in their thinking, in the longer term, extend that to businesses as well. So I think that's another interesting development which we started to work on. It got held up, frankly, a little bit by COVID because we just weren't able to organise face-to-face type events, and we're now thinking about different ways of doing it.
And just finally, your outline for us talks about helping small and medium enterprises to launch circular products. So I just wanted to ask, do you feel like your circular economy programmes focus enough on repairing existing goods rather than just making new goods out of essentially recycled materials?
Oh yeah, definitely. Repairing existing and reusing and sharing, I think that they're all important parts of the circular economy programme. One of the things which we're going to be doing in the coming year is this sort of ultra low waste neighbourhoods, which I think is a really interesting concept because we'll be able to test out within a small area all those sorts of things. Can we establish local repair? Can we establish local reuse? How do we make this area, working with the borough, actually become ultra low waste, and what does that mean, and what does it mean for the residents, what does it mean for the businesses? So I think that's a really interesting experiment, and something that would be transform all around the world.
Okay, thank you. That sounds really interesting. I'll hand back to the chair now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And extra points as well, Assembly Member Berry, for sneaking in a meeting. That's very good. I know members can hear some noises off. I know that's being looked at as well, so don't worry, that's in hand. Assembly Member Marima.
Thank you. I was just really interested to hear about, in your papers, and following on from Assembly Member Berry's question about your kind of financial plans and your sustainability and when your funding goes on to. What do you anticipate the top 3 challenges for the role of the Chair of Re-London over the coming few years, over the rest of this term? And how, looking at your CV and your work experience, how do you anticipate addressing these?
So I think the funding and the long-term sustainability for Re-London is forefront in my mind. And that's maybe a little selfish because it means we want Re-London to exist, but I think Re-London needs to exist for a period. I think that on a bigger scale, actually coming up with and implementing proper climate emergency plans are really, really important for businesses as well as for boroughs. And so helping Re-London work out what it can do to help businesses and boroughs develop their climate emergency plans. Now, businesses you might think are going to be better equipped to do it because they may have expertise in-house or access to it, but there'll be an awful lot of businesses who don't. And boroughs, I think if we work with a few boroughs to actually develop the model, then that ought to be something we can share with others. So I think tackling the climate emergency is absolutely fundamental. And then part of that is this whole consumption-based emissions, in the fact that 45% of the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions that we produce are related to all the stuff we use and the food we eat.
Okay. And just out of interest, be interested to hear how Re-London works in supporting delivery of green jobs, you know, in terms of the Mayor's Green New Deal and that programme.
So we're part of it. So we're part of those discussions, and the business transformation programme I mentioned earlier works closely with a lot of SMEs, and some of them, some of that funding goes through the Green Deal programme. So I think it's, we're focused on SMEs in the circular space and trying to make sure that they get the best support they need, whether it's direct funding or actually just hand-holding and guidance and advice and influencing.
Okay. And how's the work of Re-London changed during the pandemic? You know, we see people using, rightly, face masks, but many of those are disposable. How have things changed, either operationally in that way or just in terms of your business planning?
There were clearly there have been a number of programmes that we were not able to start or we had to delay because they were basically face-to-face. They were going to be face-to-face, and we had to either find different ways of doing them or delay them. So we've been planning some stuff with schools and universities, which was not going to happen, but they will happen in the future. So that resulted in a little bit of a budget underspend during last year, which is fine. We budgeted that, so that was just part of business planning. In terms of practicalities, I think it was a shock for the organisation to all of a sudden be working from home and not hearing conversations that others were having on the phone, or not. We needed to find different ways of communicating and keeping everybody up to speed, and I think the team did a fantastic job of that. And some of them struggled more with working from home than others, and so on and so forth. In terms of the delivery that the programme did, we had to change the way in which we were working with the boroughs, partly to address some of the issues that came up earlier about how do you manage the difference in services required. All of a sudden, everybody's working at home. You've suddenly got far more stuff coming out of people's houses and less coming out of businesses. So how do you address all those sorts of challenges? So there have been issues for the organisation. There have been issues for the work we did, which we will still continue doing, and then there have been some bits of work which we had to slow down or postpone.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question is, what do you think is the biggest opportunity for the Chair of Re-London over the coming term?
Well, there are some fantastic goals here, and there'll be there is so much potential to put London truly on the map in terms of the stuff it's doing on food waste, on flats recycling, with businesses. London is rightly regarded as a leading capital, and I see no reason why, especially wearing my hat on food waste, I can just see London being the flagship and the shining light for tackling food waste and demonstrating it to the rest of the world that that is the way cities can do it. It's quite interesting that all cities around the world have a growing food waste problem, and London could be the first one to reverse that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any colleagues have any further questions? If not, that's great. Can I thank you, Dr. Goodwin, for attending today's meeting and for your helpful contributions. We've got a bit of business to discuss now, but you're free to leave the virtual meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. So the committee is now required to make a decision on its recommendation to the Mayor as to whether or not the nominee should be appointed as Chair of London. I didn't detect or pick up any particular feelings against. So can I suggest a possible resolution, which is that it be agreed to recommend that the Mayor should proceed with his appointment of Dr. Liz Goodwin, OBE, to the office of Chair of London. Is everybody in agreement? I see unanimous agreement, so we shall send that to the Mayor. Thank you. A letter will be sent to the Mayor following this meeting to confirm the committee's recommendation. And as we have no other business, I believe that concludes today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was the bit.
Effectively, Chair.